Hello and welcome back to the Rate Show. We're Sahan and Jerzen, and this is a show where we discuss tools, techniques, and systems in the world of productivity and decide whether they're overrated, underrated, or somewhere in between. Jerzen, tell me, how has your week been?
I'm doing good, man. I'm still on summer vacation. My classes start in about 2 weeks or so, 2 to 3 weeks, and I'm excited for that. Also scared, but also excited. And I'm partially excited because we're going to go back on campus after a whole year of classes online. I think my classes in person start in October, so that's exciting. So I have to book my tickets, expect my quarantine and all that. Something else that I've been up to is I have been learning Arabic. Well, technically Emirati Arabic, which is the Arabic dialect that they speak here in Dubai and in the United Arab Emirates. So I did learn Arabic when I was in school, and I wouldn't say I'm proficient at it. I'm not that good. I cannot hold up a conversation, but I decided that I was here for 18 years. It's probably a good idea that I learn it. It's not necessary, but it's just something that I want to do. How has your week been?
My week has been very good, yes. So I spent the last 3 or 4 days up in Scotland in a place called Kilburn. I don't remember the name, but what I didn't do was I did not take a phone or a laptop with me. So it was three
Oh,
days of unadulterated digital peace. The digital fasting, I think, is the buzzword people like to
yeah,
use.
I think that's a
And
term.
yeah, it was
Yeah.
very enlightening. Very surreal to wake up in the morning and not have a phone to pick up and check, or a TikTok to scroll, or an Instagram feed to check. So yeah, it was a really good experience.
I still don't have TikTok. I feel like that's something that I'm not proud of it, but it's something that's different. I have not made a TikTok account, and I think TikTok's been in the popular ranks for about 2, 3 years now, right?
Yeah, dude, TikTok has been big for a while. It's funny because it started out as a different app called Musically, which was much more about dancing, and then it transformed into this behemoth that we know today as TikTok. But to
Yeah.
be honest, I
Hmm.
don't recommend it. Yeah, it is a massive time sink, and it's
I've
definitely
heard that
not
it's really addicting. Yeah.
incredibly addicting. And the content isn't particularly, like, it's not deep. A lot of it is very superficial. It's a bit like in YouTube, how the first 30 seconds of every YouTube video tends to be very big, bold, brash, big claims. People, they want to suck you in, and then they go into the deep stuff afterwards. TikTok is like that, except there's no deep stuff. Everything is just has to be eye grabbing, yeah, attention seeking stuff. And so I don't recommend it. I do have a TikTok account, which yeah is probably a bit
Makes
hypocritical
it.
of me, but what can you
Ah,
do?
it's
Yeah.
like that's all right. Yeah. So how was the digital minimalism week? Like, did you find it difficult at first, or was it a smooth transition?
I think it was a smooth transition because I was in a different environment. Like, I'm very big on the fact that one of the easiest way to change habits, well, is to just change physical location. And so, because I was in a new place, new bedroom, I didn't have the same cues. Like, for example, when I wake up in my bed at home, there's my desk next to me. I know that my phone is going to be there. So even in a mid slumber, I'll reach over and pick it up. But it was interesting to see how much I craved things. Like, for example, a scroll on the social media feed before bed, or
The
yeah, just
little
trying to fill
dopamine
up the
hit.
pauses. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
exactly. Just fill up life's little pauses, like in the car. But what I will say is, I read so much, man. Like, I think I read 3 books just because I had
Oh
nothing. Like, I literally
wow.
would read for 2, 3 hours a night because we'd get back from a day of like being out in the rain in the middle of nowhere at like 6, and I'd probably go to bed at like 11. So, and we'd have dinner in between, but all that time was just spent reading. So yeah, it was
That's
good
cool.
fun.
Were they actual physical books because you didn't take any devices, no Kindle or no iPad or whatever? Or
Yeah,
do
they
you
were physical
usually read
books.
physical? Or do you usually read physical books? I'm not aware. I don't know. What do you usually
So
read?
I would say I'm a big fan of physical books,
Mm-hmm.
but most of my reading is digital. Like, I think when I started doing this whole note taking thing, like, for people who don't know, we're both Remnote mentors, which is a note taking software app. And so I'm very big on taking notes on what I read. And that sort of mentality leads you towards digital reading. So either on a Kindle or on a PDF reader. But I do enjoy reading physical books, especially for fiction. Like,
Yeah,
fiction, there's something about holding a physical book and just like
I would
turning the
agree.
pages that is, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So what about
Like
you?
I
Do you read
bought
a lot
the
or?
I do, yeah, but I mostly read on my iPad using Apple Books. But I have recently started reading fiction with physical books, only because I had the entire Song of Ice and Fire series by George R. R. Martin, or Game of Thrones for everyone that's familiar with the TV show. And it was picking up dust in my parents' house, and I thought, okay, might as well read something. And I picked it up, and it's been great. I feel like an other aspect of actually making it fun and making it more, I don't know what to call it, immersive with a fiction book, it's to actually have the book in your hands and then you read the pages, flip through them. I think that's pretty great. You just don't get that with, but I mean, you just don't get that with a digital alternative. But I do prefer digital alternatives, mostly because you can highlight and stuff. I'm not going to highlight a fiction book. So highlighting nonfiction books, it's much easier because it's much easier on an iPad or a Kindle. I did try to read a nonfiction book, like a physical book, and yeah, highlighting was such a mess because I didn't want to actually highlight on the book, so I used to use sticky notes, but then you run out of them, you have to write on them. It wasn't that easy.
So today we are talking about unpleasurable productivity. And what I mean by this is ways or techniques that we use to do things that we're not really looking forward to. So that is eat the frog, batching, and Pomodoro. So shall I
Right.
start with eat the frog?
Yeah, I'll start with Eat the Frog. So I am not aware of what Eat the Frog is, so we can do something where you go through it and sort of teach me what that is, and then I can give my thoughts on it. Considering that I have not done it, maybe I have. Let's see. Go on.
So, eat the frog. This phrase originates from something by Mark Twain, who said, if it's your job to eat a frog, it's best to do it first thing in the morning. And if it's your job to eat two frogs, it's best to eat the biggest one first. So that quote is attributed to him. And then this quote got taken by a guy named Brian Tracy, who is very famous for writing these personal productivity books in the 80s and the 90s, I think. And so he wrote a book called Eat That Frog 21 Great Ways to Stop Procrastinating and blah, 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 blah. And essentially, there are three steps to eat the frog. Number one is to identify your frog. So the most difficult task or the task you're least looking forward to in the day. Step two is to eat it. So that means complete it, take the time to fully finish that task or project. And number three is to repeat it every day. So the idea is that you make this a habit. Every morning you wake up and you decide what is the biggest, ugliest frog I have in my to do list or in my calendar, and you do that first. Yeah, so after just hearing about it now, what are your first thoughts on Eat the Frog?
First of all, the analogy is funny. Eating a frog, that's not what I would think about. I've never eaten frog legs. I know that's a delicacy in some areas. Have you eaten a frog? Have you ever tried it?
No, I've been to Paris a few times, and I've made it. I'd say made it a thing to avoid eating frogs. Snails I've
Okay,
tried, but
all
never
right.
frogs.
Ah, okay, interesting. All right. So, what do I think about the actual productivity thing? I think it does make sense, right? Like it makes total sense where you would want to get the biggest task out of the way first thing in the morning. I tend to do that sometimes, especially if it's something that's study related. If you there's probably some subject that you don't want to study, and I would try to get that out of the way first. But I think this is like the opposite to the other productivity, like getting things done kind of thing, where it's you start with a small task and you sort of snowball them, like the snowball effect. It's sort of the exact opposite of that, where you get the biggest thing done first rather than the smallest thing. And yeah, I think it's subjective. Like it depends on what kind of person you are. And I have subconsciously eaten the frog many times. Like I've done this a lot, and I would think it's a pretty good productivity hack. And yeah, I would say it's underrated. Like it's pretty cool. What do you think?
So I think, like we've seen many times on this podcast, it's funny how different approaches to productivity almost take different ends of the spectrum. So, like you said, Eat the Frog is great for those people who are big procrastinators and need to overcome like a big task in the morning to feel that like for some people that's really motivating, and for other people to do your toughest task first would be really difficult in and of itself because, like I said, some people need a small snowball effect to start. And so I actually I found a good phrase for this. So you have eat the frog on one side, and you have there's this thing called first pancake productivity. I don't know who came up with it. I found it in a blog post. I'll link it in the description. And the idea of this is that whenever you make pancakes, the first one of every batch is a little bit ugly, a little bit messed up. And the woman who wrote this post said we should translate this to our productivity. And when we wake up in the morning and when we start our tasks, we should do things that we know that we have a little leeway on, that we know that it doesn't need to be perfect. And for her, she felt that by letting herself mess up in the morning, but doing something that she enjoyed, it would increase her motivation and actually help her. So I think Eat the Frog is neither underrated or overrated. It just depends on where you lie on the productivity spectrum. For some people, it'll be the best thing since sliced bread. For other people, it will not work at all.
I think this also relates to the daily highlight, which is something that I keep talking about because I think it's a pretty revolutionary idea. Where the daily highlight, for those of you who don't know, is basically one task or project or whatever that you have to get done in a particular day. And I have a daily highlight 99% of the time because, it's very easy to ignore a to-do list, especially if you write it or put it away in a to-do list app. And I think this sort of relates to that where, I mean, not really, because the difference is that in the daily highlight throughout the day, you do tasks that will get you to that ultimate goal of that final daily highlight. But the Eat the Frog thing is just getting it out of the way first thing in the morning. I think this is pretty applicable to students as well, though, because, I mean, me as a morning person, I try to wake up before 7 on most days, and then getting the biggest task out of all of them done when you have the most energy, at least for me, I think that's a pretty great idea. Right, so the next thing that we have is batching. So what's batching, Sahan?
So batching is the idea that you should do plan tasks and group them together, tasks that are similar. And the idea is that by doing this, you can improve focus and productivity. And normally people think of batching as putting the similar tasks together in terms of what you're doing. So for example, let's say I'm writing blog posts, you stick them all together. But you can batch based on a number of different things. For example, you could batch based on the app you're working in. So let's say you're working in Notion or you're working in PowerPoint, you batch all those tasks. The hardware, so let's say you're shooting videos, you use your camera for those tasks, you batch those. Based on the type of work, and by type I mean, is it high energy, low energy, creative, non-creative, or the people involved. And so why people batch? Batching makes things apparently easier. So let's say because you're context switching less, which means the idea is that when you change context, your brain is not really adapted to multitasking and you have a sort of lag. So let's say I move from writing an essay to, spaced repetition. There will be a lag in between in terms of when my brain's trying to catch up with me. And so by going between the two things, I'm actually losing potential output or productivity. The other thing is speed. So let's say I'm editing videos, like for my TikTok. For me, it makes a lot of sense to do those in a row because it speeds things up. Like I don't have to open Premiere Pro every time. I don't have to go through the process again. So by grouping those together, I get things done quickly. And the last reason people would batch is to focus their attention. So let's say you really want to write great tweets. Let's say you batch those up and you say for 1 hour a week, I'm going to just write tweets on my Twitter. It really focuses on your attention on that medium. And through that focus, you can get more done and you might have high productivity output. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
So what are your
I have
thoughts
a couple
on
things to
batching?
say. I have a couple things to say, but before that, I have a question. Do you actually edit your TikToks in Premiere Pro?
Yes. Well, for my TikToks, what they are is they're not filmed on my phone. So it's content that I've scraped off YouTube and I edit them to fit a certain time frame, usually about between 20 and 40 seconds. And so, yes,
okay,
I
that
do
makes more
edit my
sense.
TikToks in Premiere Pro.
That's
Yeah.
It's like taking a Bentley to school every day. Wow. Okay. I
Yeah.
think the correct terminology for batching is you get into a state of flow. I've heard this being thrown around a lot of times. It's that when you're doing one certain task, doing other similar tasks takes less energy, it just takes less thought to do it. And I think that's pretty great. It's sort of like you don't want to wash your clothes one by one every time you wear them. Like I wear this t-shirt today, I'm not going to wash it tonight in the washing machine. You would rather wash it maybe once a week together. You batch them together. I feel like that's a pretty good analogy. And yeah, I do batching a lot. I've done batching for my YouTube videos. So when I was flying back from Riga, where I study and where I live, to Dubai, where my parents live, I batched and recorded about 3 or 4 videos because I knew I wouldn't be able to record them And this saves a lot of time. I also do this before exam season because during exam season, I don't want to set up my, because I have all these studio lights and my camera and the mic and all that. I don't want to sit and build them up. I mean, that takes about a solid 20, 30 minutes, which I could use for something else. So I don't want to keep doing that. So I would batch record maybe 3, 4 videos. That's all I can do at max. That takes maybe 3 hours. And yeah, that's how I usually think of batching. I don't think batching can be applied to something like studying. I mean, maybe, yeah, but for the most part, I think it's for things that take more effort to get into the state of flow of, if that makes sense. What do you usually batch in? Like, what do you use batching
So,
for?
so I see batching is almost like a barbell. I think the highest value comes from batching your very, as in very creative things and very low. So, for example, let's say with editing, um, so the idea of flow that you're talking about is, I think it's definitely useful for batching, but for a lot of tasks, you can't get into flow because flow has lots of different requirements. Like it has to, for example, your flow has to have like a certain amount of difficulty, the task you're doing, and you have to have it enjoyed a certain amount. And so there are certain tasks that I know I can't get into flow as in the actual technical term, but batching helps just because with some things they're just dull and minute and tiny, and you just need to get them out of the way. Like for example, editing my TikToks now. Before I was at a stage where I get into flow because I'd find it quite interesting. Like I hadn't done it before, but now after 7 or 8 weeks, like I know what I'm doing, and it's not particularly enjoyable. So I don't think I get into that same state of flow as like let's say when I'm writing a video or filming a video. But batching still works because it just, like I said, for me it's the value in speed, getting it out that really helps. So I think batching also works for work that you can't really get into flow for, like low menial tasks. Like for example, you could say that cleaning your room, like for example, cleaning your desk, cleaning the floor, making your bed, doing that all the stuff, all those little tasks. When you batch them together and clean your room, you won't get into flow. But by batching those together, it makes things easier, and it just yeah, I'm a big fan of batching for
All right,
all
okay.
aspects, like low value work and high value work as well.
Okay. Like I just thought of an example where I use batching a lot. So in my first and second year of medical school, we had two subjects, histology and embryology. And in these, we had to draw what we saw on the microscopic slide. So histology is basically study of microscopic structures, and embryology about well, embryos. And for both of them, you would use a microscope, look at the slides, and then we have to draw what we see. And I hated doing that. I hated drawing. That's like art has never been my thing. I'm trying to get into it now. That's a different story. But what I decided was I'm going to batch draw all of these little structures. And that made it so much more easier. I could just bash through, we called them protocols. I could just bash through like 3 or 4 protocols in 2 hours. And that was much easier than spending more time each week drawing it. And then yeah, so I would do it for things, like you said, things that you don't necessarily want to do, which is also the theme of this week's episode, unpleasurable productivity. So I see how this all fits in. So, underrated, overrated, or somewhere in between?
So I would say batching is definitely underrated. Yeah, it might not be appropriate for many things, but like I said, low value work, dude. When you batch things that you don't want to do and you just get them done in like a 30-minute session, dude, it feels so good. Like yeah, so underrated, I think.
All right, okay. I would say it's somewhere in between because it's very easy to push things away and then just say, oh, I'm just going to batch it. You know, you keep batching, you're like, okay, I'm going to do it next week. But then next week, a task like that comes up again, and you're just going to say, oh, I'm going to batch it again. And then you keep going, and eventually you're not going to do everything. So I would say it's somewhere in between. It's a good concept, but it's very easy to skip away from. Right, so the final thing we're going to be talking about is, yeah. So the final thing we're going to be talking about is Pomodoro. This is very popular among the study YouTuber space. You have all these videos about Pomodoro timer, study with me, the 3-hour videos and all that from Carmen Medic and all those big YouTubers. So Pomodoro, I did a little bit of research, and Pomodoro means tomato in Italian, and this is because there was this whole tomato timer thing. I'm not going to get into that, but basically what Pomodoro is when you, the classic one is when you do 25 minutes of work, like due diligent work without any distractions, no phones, nothing, and then you take a 5-minute break where you can do whatever you want, and then you get back to it with a 25-minute. And I think you do maybe 4 cycles of this, and then you take a 30-minute break or 15-minute break or whatever. I think Pomodoro for study, I think it's kind of overrated, right? And here's my thought process. It takes a certain amount of time to, for example, with medicine, it takes some time to actually understand things. That's my preferred way of studying. And I say this all the time. When you're studying, you don't just want to memorize everything. You want to understand what you're studying. This is like the Feynman technique, if you can explain to a 5-year-old. When you try to understand something, it's inevitably going to take you some amount of time. So I could start studying at 8. By 8:05, I'm actually properly studying. And I come across something, maybe let's say it's physiology, and it's like, I don't know, mean corpuscular volume. I don't understand what that is, so I go to Google, I go to all these resources, my textbooks and whatever, and I take about 15 minutes to actually understand it. And then I take maybe 2 minutes to write a question. So that's already 15 to 20 to 25 minutes gone like that. And then I have to take a break. That, I don't think that's very efficient. It's not efficient at all. I would rather take, instead of time points as checkpoints, I would take, chapters or these amount of questions or paragraphs or whatever. I would take that sort of measure of when I can take a break rather than the time. But you can also change it. Usually when I am doing Pomodoro, I would switch up the time. So instead of doing the 25-5 thing, I would do something like 40-10. That usually works a little bit better for me. And another thing is, when do I use Pomodoro? I only use Pomodoro for things that like I said, unpleasurable productivity. If it's a subject that I really don't want to study or a certain topic that I really don't want to study, I would just use Pomodoro and just get it done. Even if I don't feel like doing it, even if I hate the whole process, you have to get it done anyway. That's life. So I would get it done using Pomodoro. What are your thoughts about this, Sahan?
I think the Pomodoro might be, in my personal opinion, the most overrated thing that we've had on this podcast so far.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Dude, I cannot describe to you my dislike of the Pomodoro. I think my main issue with it is its 25 minutes, 5-minute off thing. I just think it's wrong for so many reasons. So firstly, let's talk about getting into flow. So I mentioned this before. For me, especially when I'm doing, I think it was because my degree was very much about writing and thinking and reading. So for me, 25 minutes was never enough time to get into flow. Let's say I'm reading a book. I would need to be reading that book for longer than 25 minutes and taking notes to really get into the zone. And then 5-minute breaks. Dude, what are you going to do in a 5-minute break? No one feels rested after a 5-minute Pomodoro break. It's absolutely ridiculous. The idea that you can take 5 minutes to somehow zone out. It's like the 5 minutes, you don't have enough time to switch to resting, so you're not fully rested. And then but because you're taking a break, you're out of the zone. So it's a lose-lose. Dude, and so...
I love how passionate you are about this.
Dude, it honestly annoys me so much. It's like... Mm-hmm. So I can understand, I think for beginners, I can understand why it's useful. Because it's quite fun. I think one of the reasons people like it is because it's sort of the same people who enjoy ticking off boxes enjoy getting Pomodoro chunks done. Looking back on a session being like, oh, I did 4 Pomodoro, whatever, I don't know what you call them, chunks, bites. I think for some people, they would feel some sort of pleasure from that. But for me, I've never, ever, it's never been useful. I think maybe if the time was longer, it was, like you said, 50 minutes or 45 minutes or even an hour and a half. But, I don't know. I don't know why we've become obsessed with these short little, work sessions. I guess it's a flip, right? You have these people doing 10-hour study sessions on YouTube, which is ridiculous. But for me, I always found that personally, my best sort of work session is between an hour and an hour and a half, especially when you're doing stuff that isn't just memorizing or testing. If you're doing any sort of writing or research, I think you need longer than 25 minutes. I'm pretty passionate about this. I will say Pomodoro is great for stuff that's very mechanistic. So like you were talking about learning Arabic, when I was learning Spanish and I was using Anki, sorry Remnote, I was using Anki, hands up.
I don't think Remnote existed
Pomodoro,
back then, so.
Yeah, exactly. It's not my fault. I don't think it did exist.
Don't shoot the messenger.
But I would use, exactly. It's not my fault. Karthik, forgive me. But so I used Pomodoro for that because it's quite good for doing things that you don't want to do, like with the theme of this episode. But yeah, I'm very anti-Pomodoro when it comes to things like your key work, the important stuff in your Eisenhower matrix, important and urgent, Don't Pomodoro it. Yeah.
I think it's also like for me, I think of my focus. I don't know what would you call it, but the amount of time I can focus very thoroughly without actually thinking about anything else or getting distracted is around 40 to 45 minutes. And that's how I base my Pomodoro sessions. Like after 40 minutes, I start to get distracted and I don't really understand what I'm studying. Like I feel like things are just drifting apart, right? So that's why I keep 40 minutes as my Pomodoro thing. And then I always make it a thing. Like my break is not going to be sitting at the same place, taking my phone and then going through Instagram or something. I try to do something that I call tier two tasks, which are basically like not wasteman stuff, I'll leave it all, but things that I have to get done, but I don't really want to be doing. So, for example, in that time, I would do something like, I don't know, wash a couple of dishes from breakfast, or I would vacuum my room. That's the sort of break I would prefer doing because that's still doing some sort of work. And then, it just keeps you in that state of, being productive and doing some things. Some people do this thing where I've seen this where they would do 25 minutes. I'm just going to use a 25-5 example. 25 minutes of one task. So let's say studying physiology, 5-minute break. The next 25 minutes, you're going to study another subject like microbiology. And I never saw the point in that. Maybe it could work for subjects that are pretty similar. So I can't think of any off the top of my head. But what do you think of that? Like, have you ever heard about that? And what do you think about it?
So I think this is a good idea gone wrong. It's been Pomodorified the wrong way. So research shows that when you're studying in a day, you want to study different subjects. So let's say I have 4 A levels. I don't want one day for geography, one day for biology, one day for chemistry, one day for physics. You want to have different periods in the day when you do those different subjects because it makes it more difficult. And like we know with the forgetting curve, the idea is that you need to return to your work on a regular basis for the ideas to become solidified in your memory, your mind. And so I actually think the idea of doing different subjects in the same day or in different periods after one another is quite good. But again, Pomodoro is just too short, 25 minutes. What are you going to learn in 25 minutes? Or what are you really going to test yourself in 25 minutes? Not a lot. So yeah, I've never seen anyone do it, but I wouldn't recommend it to anyone out there.
To touch on what you just said, where you have multiple subjects that you have to learn, I think it's more smart. It's a better idea to actually dedicate different times of the day for each subject. That's how I do it personally, and that usually works with me. And the reason I have to do this is because sometimes I have 2 exams in 1 week. So maybe let's say I'm going to go back to the physio and micro example. I have the physiology exam coming up on Tuesday and microbiology on Thursday. There is no way where I can keep studying physiology until Tuesday and then spend 1 day for microbiology. I would end up failing. So what I tend to do is, so I personally found physio a little bit more difficult than micro. I would spend the morning where my focus is high to study physiology, and then I would spend the afternoon to study microbiology. I would split it up into different parts of the day, and that usually helps me much more than, doing one subject, jumping to the other one, jumping back to this one. I think that's, like you said, it's a good idea gone wrong. So I think we've already established this, but underrated or overrated?
Massively, massively, massively overrated. Like, I'm sure it must work for some people, but it's never done anything for me. What about you?
All right. I mean, I think it's a good idea if you tweak it a little bit. Like I said, if you change up the times, you don't have to do 25-5. If you do it, maybe like I said, for me, 45 or 40-10, that works better for me. I think at that point, it's a pretty good idea. But, it's not the best way to study or get work done. I think there are better ways out there. So I would reserve this for things that I don't feel like doing. So I would say it's sort of overrated as well.
Yeah, I think you're right. But I think Pomodoro, like you said, is super useful for your menial tasks, like batching those and focusing on those. But when it comes to your high value work, like your creative work, yeah, put it to the side and do something else. Overrated.
All right, okay. You can eat the frog at that point. Or batch. Or, don't botch it, but batch it. Right, okay, so that's 3 of our things done. Let's jump into our underrated thing of the week. You want to go first? What's your underrated thing of this week?
So my underrated thing of the week is a physical alarm clock. Now, whenever people come into my bedroom, whether it's been at university or at home, one of the things they always notice and they always laugh at is I've a very old, antiquated alarm clock with it's like a brass metal finish and a white face. And people just look at me like, we have phones nowadays, Sahan. Like, why do you have this old clock sitting next to you? And for me, it's because there's something that very pleasurable about devices that only do one thing. The older I've got, although I love these smartphones and computers, there's something about a device doing one thing that means that you don't get distracted. Like with my phone alarm, when I turn my alarm up on my phone, I'm instantly on Safari or Twitter or Facebook or Insta. Whereas with this physical alarm clock, like it's just, yeah, dude, it just wakes me up. I will say, I think the fact, like, the sound is honestly the most painful thing. Like, it's a very high pitched ringing, and that's not enjoyable. But in terms of waking me up, for all those people who sleep through their alarms on their phone, dude, if you get a physical alarm clock, you're not going to sleep through it, especially when you put it on the other side of the room. Yeah,
Yeah.
great way to wake up.
I think that's a little underrated thing in the underrated thing. Putting your alarm, whatever it is, like a physical alarm clock or a phone, across the room and not right next to you. I tend to do that. I actually use two alarms. When I'm in Riga, I use two alarms to wake up. The one of them is actually my Google Home. So I have a little Google Home. I have a mini right here, but the full size, the old one, and also my phone. The way I do it is, okay, so why do I have two? That's because one of them is really easy to stop. So I tend to put my alarm on the Google Home, so because it's just nicer. It's a better tone than the typical iPhone alarm where it's like da-da-ding, da-da-ding. I don't like that. It's way too violent of an alarm to wake up to. I know you can change it, but I don't like any of them. So yeah. So the thing with the Google Home is that you can scream or just say stop, and it stops. Like the alarm just stops. It doesn't snooze or anything. It's not gonna ring again. So the first couple of times it was okay. I woke up and then I said stop. I was already awake. But a week later, I realized that I was subconsciously saying stop in my sleep when I heard the alarm. So I wouldn't even know that the alarm went off. So that was a problem. There's a little mute button, but then that's just such a hassle. You have to always mute the Google Home before you sleep, and I really don't want to do that. So I have this alarm, and then I have another alarm on my phone set 5 minutes later, and that's across the room. So I actually have to get up and go there and click it. And that has helped me. And that's helped me a ton, the going across the room thing, because that sort of wakes you up. And another thing I do is on the way, I would keep a glass of water. And I would drink the glass of water. So drinking a glass of water as soon as you wake up is great for you because it kickstarts your metabolism, blah, blah, blah. But I found that it also wakes you up. You know, you're really dehydrated when you wake up. I am, at least. And then drinking that sort of wakes you up. It's great. And then go about your day. Nowadays, what I do is I got an Apple Watch, right? And the Apple Watch has this feature where you can keep a silent alarm. And this has become my favorite way of waking up. Why? Because it just taps you on the wrist without any sound. It's enough to wake you up where it just like goes like, it just vibrates, but it's not like blowing up vibrate. Vibrate, wow. Can we do that part again? Okay. I got a notification, I got distracted. I'm gonna put my computer on Do Not Disturb. Right, I'm gonna start from the Apple Watch part. So my preferred way of waking up nowadays has become the Apple Watch. And this is because the Apple Watch has this feature where you have a silent alarm. It doesn't have any sound, but it uses the little vibration motor. I think it's called the Taptic Engine to wake you up by tapping you on the wrist. And I think this is a really good way to wake up peacefully without any sounds or anything like that. It's vibrant enough to actually wake you up, but it's not loud or it's not gonna like, you know, it's not gonna like shake your arms. I think that's a pretty good way to wake up. So yeah, I have never used physical alarm clocks, by the way. Like I've never tried it. I don't plan on doing it either, but I think it's a good idea. You know, like having one device, like you said, with one sole purpose. I think that's a pretty good idea, and the alarm clock is a pretty good example. All right, so
Yeah, before we move on, I think one of the roguest things I've ever did in terms of waking up was so for YouTube, I have a massive key light, like
okay,
really big. Like I think it's 180 centimeters, and it's huge and very bright. And I found that what I bought was I bought like these plug timers. So basically, you have these timers, right, and you stick them in your electrical socket, and they have a clock on it, and it turns the device on and off based on the times you put. And what I did was I put my key light into that, and so at 6 a.m. my key light would shine on me. Dude, and it was great for waking up. It was not. The reason I didn't keep it was firstly my key light is massive, and And secondly, like it was really annoying, dude. As in, like it was such an unpleasant way of waking up with just this bright light shining on you.
I
But
can imagine.
yeah, because a
Yeah.
sunrise alarm clock is like £300 here. It's crazy. It's just for like a little LED
Oh
lamp that
wow.
lights up.
Yikes. Okay. I mean, yeah, key lights are really. I have a key light back in Riga, and that thing is. It's bright and it's also hot, right? Like it gets so
Mm,
warm. I actually
yeah.
start sweating while recording my videos. Like 30 minutes in, I start sweating because it's just so hot. But that's actually a smart idea. Like, I think that's a pretty good idea. I like waking up. I like the idea of alarms that aren't audible. Like tapping you with the Apple Watch or waking you up with like lights with the key light thing or the what was it called? The sunrise alarm clock? That, I think that's a pretty good
Yeah, they're called
idea.
sunrise alarm clocks.
So my underrated thing of this week is it's not one thing, but it's a collection of it's a type of app. It's the read later app category, and apps that fall into this are Instapaper and Pocket. I personally use Instapaper, and what these apps are basically, if you haven't heard of them, it's basically an archive or a collection of articles or PDFs or whatever you want to read, and the whole gist of it is that it's really easy to send things into the app. So with Instapaper, for example, you can hit the little share icon if you're on your phone or on the Mac. On Safari, you actually have an extension, so you can click it and the little button, and the whole page just goes into Instapaper. And on my phone and my iPad, you can just hit the share icon, and it even works with email, where you can just forward it to a specific email address, and it just populates inside the Read Later app inside Instapaper. Why do I find this useful? Why do I call this underrated? Basically, whenever you come across an article, it's probably going to be on some sort of social media. And me personally, I don't check social media when I do check it when I'm free, but like sometimes I'm not in that mood to read something. I'm not in the mood to learn something, right? You just want to scroll through social media. You want to see, I don't know, TikToks or whatever. So I would send it to a read later app so I can have something to read. One, it gives you something to read all the time, and two, it's you can read it when you're in a state of wanting to read. So for me, that's usually in the morning. So in the morning, what I do is I would take my iPad and I would do maybe 30-ish minutes of reading while drinking my coffee, using Instapaper, so I can read all these newsletters and whatnot. I like to keep my inbox, my email inbox, pretty clean. I have the zero inbox thing, and I would just forward all these newsletters that I've subscribed to if I want to read it to Instapaper. Otherwise, I would just archive it, and I think that's a pretty good idea. I think Pocket is the other one, and they're both free. That's what's great. You can pay to get additional features like highlighting and stuff, but yeah, for core functionality, it's free. I would highly recommend everyone to try it out.
Yeah, I yeah, so I've used Instapaper as well, and I think it's very useful because I think fundamentally finding good articles and reading those articles as two separate acts. I don't know about you, but like when I'm on like a roll and I'm opening different newsletters on Twitter, like finding new blogs, I at a stage where in my browser I have like 10 different tabs of all these different articles I want to read, and I just won't read them. And so the nice thing, the other thing that's very powerful is that there are lots of articles that in the moment I think will be really interesting, and then like a day, a couple of days, a week later, actually I realize they're not that relevant to me. So it separates the act of finding those articles and reading them, which means you just read less rubbish essentially. Like by leaving that time into filter, you only end up reading the things that really interest you, which I think is a underrated benefit of these read later apps.
Exactly, yeah. I actually spoke about read later apps in one of my videos where I think it was titled how to get into reading and how to just read more. And I would say that, well, first of all, you don't like when people think of reading, you always think of books. I always say that you can read articles, newsletters, that's still considered reading because those are just diluted books basically. And I feel like read later apps are a core essential to get into reading more newsletters and articles. Right, so that wraps up this week's episode where we spoke about unpleasurable productivity. See you next week, guys. Goodbye.
See you next week, guys.